The Age of Uncertainty podcast by Nigel Scale. Centralised versus de-centralised Agile coaching.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode in the Age of Uncertainty podcast. This episode is all about centralised versus decentralised Agile coaching. Now you may be wondering why I've chosen to speak about centralised versus decentralised Agile coaching, especially at the moment in the world when there seems to be very little Agile coaching going on. Well, there's a couple of reasons. Reasons number one is finally the world seems to be defrosting a little bit and coaching is starting to be taken up again and organisations are starting to think more than just about surviving. But secondly, this has been on my mind for a long time, burning away in the background. From a while ago I saw some interesting posts on LinkedIn just discussing pros and cons on centralised versus decentralised Agile coaching, and I stored it in my mental backlog thinking I really would like to talk about that someday. And today, that day has arrived. Right, for those of you with a short attention span, let me give you the answer now. Like most things in the Agile world, it isn't versus, it is and. Not decentralised versus centralised, but centralised and decentralised. I reached out onto social media to try and find some people with particularly polarised opinions on this, one way or the other, and it turns out most people thought like I did. It's all about the and. So, video over, yep. Nice quick video this week. We are done. No. Just because it's and doesn't make it easy. There's a lot of nuance of centralised and decentralised Agile coaching, and I'd like to touch upon that now. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is that balance, the nuanced balance between how much centralisation, how much decentralisation should any Agile approach have. Where should we be disciplined and aligned? Where should we be disciplined and diverse? And what parts of the transformation should we perhaps be ruthless with and exorcise? Now, if only someone had come up with a technique that could be applied in this situation. So let's look at the pros and cons of centralisation. First things first, I've heard it said that most problems are actually definition problems, so I'm going to define centralised from my point of view for this video. And what do I mean by centralised? I mean some form of approach that is normally top down, normally with some central group organising it. Now that could be a central coaching team, that could be some sort of PMO office organising it, it could be some sort of centre of excellence or something like that, but some small set of centred individuals leading in a top-down approach, the Agile transformation. So what are the pros of that type of approach? Well, I can tell you, having worked in it, some of the great stuff we had in that centralised model was great alignment and funding. Never underestimate how important it is getting the money flow correct. And when I say alignment, I don't just mean we're all going together in a direction. I mean some actual direction. We're all going in one direction. We're all heading together towards a certain point. That's really powerful. But it's not just about alignment and direction. It's actually about energy. All of us pulling in the same direction can give you great momentum, give you great inertia, can really make you feel part of a bigger unit moving forward. It can also be very ordered and very organised. We can do this with great discipline leading from the centre. What are the downsides of a centralised approach? Well, it could end up being a bit of an ivory tower. People just talking the talk rather than walking the walk. A lot of very clever people talking ideology rather than being practical and focusing on reality. Bit of a talking shop, as we say. And in fact, that can be a symptom that can be spread across the entire transformation, where a lot of it is talk. User groups, centres of excellence, people just talking and not actually getting stuff done. There could also be a difficulty in getting traction, i.e. how do we agree with who we're going to work with? Who should we work with first? I have a worry this could be a bit more push and a bit less pull, not asking for volunteers in the community, but sort of imposing coaching or change on them, which would be dastardly. You could end up being sort of a compliance zone, a process zone, where you're trying to reinforce compliance with method rather than actually enabling people to be better in their work, enabling people to enjoy their work more instead of sort of forcing on the compliance of technique. And you could end up being almost like an agile secret service or an agile Gestapo even, sort of enforcing the agile on people, being seen as the enemy, judging, or being some sort of police force of agile. And that would be terrible. You see, it's all about, in the end, process over people. Now let's look at decentralised. What do we mean by decentralised? Well, when I mean decentralised, that means that people on the ground working closely with the teams, maybe hired by the teams, or more likely hired by the lower level management near the teams to help them become agile. This is often done in a very diverse way, not organised at all from the centre, done in a very pick and mix approach, people choosing how they work and choosing where they work. Some of these coaches will be hired in as contractors or as new hires in those areas, and some will be volunteers from those areas. Now, what are the pros of this? Well, the pros of this will be self-organisation. This is really people on the ground or near the ground organising themselves and how they do their work. A great agile principle. It'll also allow diversity. This stuff isn't one size fits all, and we should never pretend it is. And so being able to have people work in diverse different ways on the ground, contextually applying this stuff, that's really, really powerful. After all, in the end, context is key. But what's the cons of this approach? What's the downsides of this approach? Well, this is why I reveal my slight bend towards centralised over decentralised, because decentralised I see at the moment have a huge amount of issues out there. You can get very watered down approaches here. It's these individual coaches can get swamped, overpowered, watered down or corrupted. They're little dots in the ocean of status quo, and that ocean can overcome them. I've always said the phrase position perverts position. And I see that a lot with coaches. They can be corrupted by the experience. I've got here a little clip from a training video I once did that may help on this scenario. So you can see here, we classically saw these three types of embedded coaches. The sort of iconoclast, fighting the system like a revolutionary and burning up. They've got to destroy the system to change the system, and they burn up and fade out quite quick. The politician, working in a sly way, using agile as their method to get higher in the organisation, and the Darth Vader, the enforcer of agile, the boss, the top-down enforcer, or the enforcer of the local boss's opinions. I think the Darth Vader one here is most interesting, the enforcer. Now, unlike in a centralised model where this enforcer is coming from the heart of the company, in a decentralised model, that enforcer could be for the low-level management's personal choices and opinions. And that can lead us towards a classic issue in large organisations, which is sub-optimisation. Each of these individual coaches on the ground working to somehow optimise their area, or in some cases, optimize their area, but even if they're working with the best of intentions, those areas can become misaligned. Each proverbial cog in the machine can be good, but the end-to-end process is bad. We always have to take that lean model of optimizing the whole in mind when we're coaching. Also, with diversity comes a range of skills. If you've got new hires or maybe volunteers in the organisation doing this, you can end up with cowboys, I'm afraid to say, running wild in your experience. And so you're relying on quite a high skill set in a diverse, decentralised approach, trusting that these people can do it in the right way. And as I'm seeing in the agile coaching world, I don't have confidence enough in the agile coaching cohort at the moment to be able to do that. So you can see, each of these approaches have pros and cons, and so picking some hybrid or some combination in the middle is essential, and getting that balance right is essential. So how can we do that? Well, first things first, in a decentralized model or a centralized model, the key factors in this work are your on-the-ground change agents, the Scrum Masters. They are the change army that should be at the forefront of this, the assault troops, if you're using a military metaphor. They need to be leading this. If they don't lead it, they'll end up just being followers, going to their doom. They need to be at the forefront of this change. They need to be supported, they need to be aligned, but they also need to be supportive of each other. our professional change army. Then we have the volunteer change army. These are the people who don't have the agile organisational change as a key part of their roles. These are the volunteers, these are the enthusiasts, these are the gifted amateurs. We need to build them into a community as well and help them help us and help them not take the organisational change in perhaps dangerous or difficult directions. I have worked with organisations that have equipped this volunteer change army with a little bit too much power, a little bit too much enthusiasm, and then they've run a bit wild in the experience and caused possibly more damage than the help they were supposed to supply. That enthusiasm, though, is key. That enthusiasm, that energy is the fuel for this transformation. So we have to harness that volunteer group as well. We really need to nurture that as coaches. I think them and the Scrum Masters are the two lead forces as coaches we support and enable to achieve this organisational change. So here, again, from a training video I've done in the past, is a little bit of advice around what strategies we should adopt as a coach in an embedded environment. So, as a decentralized coach working within an organization, I'm going to have to build centralizing networks. So in terms of the three strategies, strategy number one is get yourself a coach. Coaches need coaches. Find someone who can offer support to you as you offer support to others. Now, this could be informal or formal, a friend or someone you pay for, a professional. It could be inside work, it could be outside work. It could be agile, doesn't have to be agile. Your personal coach could be a life coach or a personal development coach, but you want someone to be a bit of a mirror for you to help you self-reflect as you help others self-reflect. The second thing is coaching through coaching. That's my second strategy, and that's what I try to do these days. As much as possible, I, as a coach, try not to coach. Now, I know that sounds bizarre, but what I want to do is coach through others. If I can help enable, collaborate, mentor, even the coach word, but if I can help support other coaches and they can coach their teams and their organizations, not only does it build capability, build ability, but also it gives redundancy. What if I want to leave or go somewhere else? We build the capability internally so we can move on. Like in centralized teams, often the joke with those centralized coaching teams is people go on them and they never come off. They spend 10, 11 years being a process expert, never actually using the process they're an expert in. And really you want those centralized teams to have some sort of turnover and churn. But life's scary. You know what it's like on the centralized team. You don't know what it's like out there. You get listened to on the centralized team. You don't get listened to out there. And so what we need to do, if you do any form of centralizing force, is allow people to feel like they can move on. It's safe for them to move to another environment. So we need to coach through coaching to build up capability so we can feel like we move from a centralized team. And we need to build coaching networks so we've got other people we know in that organization. We've got an environment to work together within so we can move around that organization. The idea behind that coaching network, that's not necessarily just about the skill of coaching. It's also just about building up the culture of coaching in an organization. Yes, we want like communities of practice on Agile. That's great. I love them. Yes, we want to have communities of practice on things like Scrum Mastery and product ownership. Great. But do we want it on Agile coaches? Maybe. But what's more important for me is building up that network of coaching, that culture of coaching, and building up that network that gives you contacts to allow you to feel safer and more secure in that organization, moving around it or moving within it, and not just being locked into your own individual jobs. Because you see, I personally believe the most common model of agile coaching, which is being brought in as a contractor at a low level in the organization by a low level middle management to work with individual teams, is an anti-pattern. It's something that does a disservice for everyone in the experience. The coach is treated like an expendable, cheap, nasty resource. The manager gets control over the coach when they really shouldn't be having that. The coach should be able to be independent and neutral and say the right things, not the expedient things to keep their contract going. And by optimizing the team, you may not be improving the organization anyway. The problem may not even be in the team. The idea of an agile coach is organizational change, not just team adoption of a framework. And so we need to get these strategies in place Get yourself a coach, coaching through coaches and building up a coaching network. And by doing so, you start building some centralizing forces in your decentralized approach, or you start decentralizing your centralized approach by spreading that information out across the network. So we've talked about building these strong networks, these strong communities. That's a really important thing, whether it's aligned or misaligned, centralized or decentralized. But the key question in centralized versus decentralized agile coaching is, where do we need alignment and where do we need variance? I don't have a simple answer for that. I'm sorry to say. I really don't. There are certain opinions I have on this though. Are you ready? It's coming back. The Nigel Scale. Oh, we all love the Nigel Scale. If you don't know what the Nigel Scale is, please watch the video down in the links below called The Nigel Scale. If you would like to visit advanced Nigel scaling, there's scaling frameworks versus Nigel Scale. Again, down in the links below. The Nigel Scale is just my little model to help me understand Scrum better, help me understand which bits of Scrum are fundamental and shouldn't be bent, which bits where we have variance and are supposed to be diverse and done in different ways, and which behaviours do we see in teams that are bad that we need to remove ruthlessly. With this model of core, good and bad, we can apply not just to our scaling frameworks, not just to our team methods, not just to Agile, but to our coaching approach as well. Which coaching behaviours are core that we must stick to and keep strong alignment across the organisation? Which ones do we want variance or variability in? And what bad behaviours do we see? Oh my God, I think this is a book. I wonder who's going to write it. But the quick advice I want to give you now on this is, most people treat as core their toolset. And when I say toolset, I don't mean their coding toolset, I mean their management toolset. OMG. They treat those management tools, whether it's Jira or something like Jira, as the thing that we must all align on. But for me, there seems to be far more effort in getting everyone to use those tools properly than there would be just the cost of translating. It's well worth analysing the actual costs of aligning these tools compared to the cost of having diverse tool sets and just translating. Have a look at it, because it may cost you as a Scrum Master, 45 minutes every week translating from your individual team-shaped tool to some global corporate setting. That's 45 minutes wasted. But if it's costing the teams 20 minutes a day per person to keep Jira updated, that cost builds up rapidly to huge amounts of money being wasted keeping aligned. Alignment is about this. Alignment does not mean they have to be the same. So keep that in mind. Have a look at your management processes you're using for this. Make sure they're giving the value to you that you want them to give, and where they're not agreeing, I see a lot of that agile toolset stuff is actually Nigel Scale 3, bad stuff, anti-patterns that get in the way of teams. Be ruthless on the ground individually with removing that potential waste. Never losing sight of the whole. Remember that. Optimize the whole. What other things would I put into this Nigel Scale model in terms of agile change? A centralized agile coaching team? For me, that's actually Nigel Scale 1. That's a core approach, having some centralized coaching team. Having only a centralized coaching team, Nigel Scale 3, that would be terrible. They would not be able to do anywhere near enough work. Having a centralized team that isn't actually coaching, that would also be Nigel Scale 3 for me. The entire point of having a centralized coaching team, well, the key word there isn't centralized, it isn't even team, it's coaching. They need to be a team actually going out and helping others, a catalyst team, helping those decentralized coaches achieve results, bringing them together, creating catalyst environments for them to work together, to enable each other and support each other. That's what that centralized team needs to do. So, looking at those Nigel Scale 1 things, those core things in agile change, and specifically looking at them from a centralized or a decentralized point of view, is interesting. We've already mentioned that independent coaching team, that sort of centralized aspect being core for me. But what else is core from the centralized world? Well, things like senior management buy-in and business buy-in. I don't think they're nice to have. I think they're fundamentals, and I think far too many people have tried to get by without them, and they are very much led from the centre. In terms of decentralised core activities, this is mainly the community building stuff, Scrum Master community, and building that volunteer change agent community, but also two huge things: using Agile to become Agile. If you Scrum your Scrum, you use Scrum on Scrum, you value slice the organisation, you optimise the whole, and you apply some lean, minimising work in progress, if you apply those Agile principles to your Agile change will be far more effective. And that leads us to the final part, which in fact is inherent in being Agile, but I just wanted to bring it out specifically. We need to have an experiment-driven approach here to how we change our organisation. Okay, it may not be exact experiments because you can't run the same thing twice, but at least a trial-based approach to inspect and adapt how we work, what we do, and how the organisation changes. There is not one size fits all, and we must stop pretending there is. In terms of sort of good practices that we see in Agile Change and how that relates to sort of centralised or decentralised, this is basically all the interesting stuff. The filler of the sandwich is far more interesting than the bread of the sandwich. This content is so variable and so contextual, I hate to even put anything down. But there's a few things here I've mentioned. Things like having a good change sponsor really helps, and building communities of practice that they're really fun, helpful tools. Are they essential? I'm not sure, but they tend to be from a sort of centralist point of view. The same thing with expert external Agile advice and Agile training and coaching. To be frank, that's my job, so I've got to be a little bit careful commenting on this, because of course I would love you to hire me and buy me in and pay my mortgage. Having said all that, I don't know if that's absolutely essential. I think it's really, really good to have that help, that advice, that Obi-Wan, that training, that coaching for your people, but it is not enough on its own, and as long as you're experiment driving and doing the stuff on the other page, I think there is a possibility you could get away without it. Then we come to the bad stuff, and I cannot bring myself to write this list. It's just depressing. It's probably everything you actually are doing. You know, in terms of essential errors made from a central Agile coaching point of view, that tends to be waterfalling your change, applying a traditional planning model to an Agile transformation, which is deadly. I also see centralist approaches often adapting Agile methods and specifically Agile principles. I know we said context is key, but some things you really shouldn't be fiddling with, and they do. And in fact, they just waterfall their Agile in general. They have this sort of fixed mindset on their adaptive world. Now, in decentralized coaching spaces, what are the common anti-patterns there? Well, bad or no sponsors, no business buy-in at all, chaotic change, weak change, feeble change that isn't really happening, just in a few small pockets. I've got Agile coaching anti-patterns there as one line. To be frank, that's an entire presentation on its own, but I think that would be a rather terrifying one to do. Well, we could keep visiting the Nigel Scale all day in terms of centralised versus decentralised coaching. But what I would be interested is to decentralise this a bit more and get some of your feedback on it. Find out actually what areas do you have in your big Agile changes, and how do you feel about them? Do you feel that this should be a one size fits all? Hey, we should all do it that way. Or are you feeling, well, we're doing it this way, it works for us, but it may not work for you? Or are you thinking, oh my God, we're doing it this way and it sucks. I'd like to know if it sucks for everyone else. So please, let's start building a conversation out of this 20-minute podcast. Let's start looking out there at all those things in the centralized and decentralized coaching transformation sphere and start trying to work out which stuff really works well and which stuff doesn't work so well, and which stuff, which by the way, is probably most of it, is contextual and in that good practices box in the middle. And we've got to the end. I was worried that was going to be a bit of a short video, but I think it grew a bit in the telling. I enjoyed it. I hope you did also. Any further questions or queries, feel free to get in contact with me. You can do it here through the email address at the end of the podcast, or drop me a tweet or whatever. We can have a chat about it. If you want to carry on the conversation, feel free to use the YouTube comments here, or the Twitter or the LinkedIn, anything there, to let's get this conversation going a bit and start digging deeper into this stuff. The next video is going to have a guest host. It's someone I've met once before, a rather scary individual called Louis Cypher, I think. And he's going to be talking us through in Halloween about agile coaching and how to do it. Well, when you see the video, you'll see how he does agile coaching just in time for Halloween. Take care. I'll see you next time. Thank you and goodbye.
Next episode, The Return of the Agile Coach, with me,